Hello, and welcome to another episode of Perspectives from the Informed Perspective. We're Penny and Jenny, and if this is your first time tuning in, we're so glad you're here. This is the podcast where we explore what it means to build thoughtful, grounded communities shaped by our local lives, but enriched by issues and ideas and experiences from around the world. For us, meaningful change starts with listening. Really listening, especially to experiences that challenge or expand our own. Today, we are talking about parenting in digital times. And if you're a parent, the bitter truth is there is simply no escaping this. The world at the moment is buzzing with this conversation, and for good reason. Where does the responsibility lie when it comes to protecting our children online? What about screen time? What content should our kids have access to and at what age? And how can we help find balance online and support healthy digital habits? If we look at the US, the 2025 Common Sense Media Census shows us that exposure to digital devices happens almost in infancy. By the age of 2, 40% of children already have their own tablet, and by age 4, that's more than half. In 2024, 51% of US children aged 8 and younger had their own mobile device, that's a smartphone or tablet, and about 9% already had their own cell phone. But it's what kind of phone that's really striking. Among those children, nearly 80% have a full smartphone. They aren't just getting a way to call home, they're getting the entire internet in their pocket. Move over to the UK, and that digital independence accelerates even faster. By the age of 11, a massive 90% of children own their own smartphone. And here, the daily immersion starts even earlier. According to Reuters, 98% of UK 2-year-olds are using screens every single day, with short-form video becoming a massive part of that viewing. In the UK, 3/4 of children aged 8 to 17 already have their own social media accounts. And we're also seeing a new frontier emerge with AI, with nearly 1 in 3 kids in the US, for example, using it as a regular part of their learning. So while the specific percentages might vary, the core story is identical. Early exposure and near universal access. It's happening everywhere, at meal times, while traveling, and in restaurants. And we can see the struggle reflected in how parents view their own roles. Between 75 and 80% of British parents express consistent concerns about mental health and inappropriate content, yet supervision varies significantly by platform. According to a Pew research from 2025, around 4 in 10 parents in the US say they could be doing more to manage their child's screen time. 2/3 believe tech companies should be doing more, and over half say lawmakers should step in too. Across studies, the pattern is clear. Parents are concerned. We check in from time to time, but we are far less often truly present in our children's digital worlds. Co-using devices is rare, and many of us don't fully understand what our children are experiencing online in real time. Maybe it's about respecting privacy. Maybe it's about time, energy, or capacity, but the gap is there between concern and real understanding. We're conflicted as parents. We see the value of the digital world, the role it plays in our children's lives, but also the risks. And that tension sits at the heart of how we navigate it, because whether you're trying to limit screen time, monitor apps, or hold the line completely, the challenge is really real. The settings, the negotiations, the constant requests for more screen time, more apps, more access, the comparisons. Everyone else has a phone or iPad. Why can't I? If parenting wasn't already complex enough, it's become even more so. Our generation didn't grow up with devices on demand, and more often than not, we're told we simply don't have the same understanding as our children. We don't fully know all the platforms, the rabbit holes, the culture, and yet our kids are growing up fluent in something we're still trying to translate. So here we are, perhaps for the first time, in a position where we may know less than our children about the world they're navigating, and yet we're meant to guide them. And many of us feel like we're figuring it out as we go along, and sometimes also making mistakes along the way. Buying a device too soon, giving access to an app that wasn't appropriate, letting them set up a social media account and regretting it perhaps later. There are so many potential potholes. So how do we make the right decisions when we don't fully understand what we're up against? Restrict access, tighten control, or is that just a reaction to feeling overwhelmed? Are social media bans the solution or just an easier response to a much more complex challenge? Doesn't it sometimes feel like there are so many experts telling us what to do with our kids when all we really want to do is trust our instincts? Perhaps we should be asking different questions altogether. Should we be collaborating more with young people, with our children, rather than simply trying to control the space they're in? So many questions. And that's exactly why I've invited our guests in today, Parven, Chris, and Lily, to explore these questions with us, share their perspectives on navigating parenting in digital times, and offer insights on how we might support our children and ourselves in this complex and connected world. So before we dig into our introductions today, I have a few quotes to get us thinking. Matt Veselovsky, he's the author of Beast. A lot of youngsters nowadays grow up being parented by devices. Parents try and fix all their children's problems by giving them things. A lot of the older generations, the baby boomers, grew up with very tight rules, very dictatorial parents, and they wanted to change that. So it swings the other way. Those parents don't want to see their children disappointed, ever. That's not healthy either, not allowing your child to feel disappointment, to want something and not get it. Gabor Mate on Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. We are enamored of communication technology without being aware that one of its primary functions is to facilitate attachments. We have unwittingly put it into the hands of children who, of course, are using it to connect with their peers. Because of their strong attachment needs, the contact is highly addictive, often becoming a major preoccupation. Our culture has not been able to evolve the customs and traditions to contain this development. And so again, we are all left to our own devices. And Jordan Shapiro in The New Childhood. Our resistance to digital play is just like Socrates' resistance to writing. It is futile. Your kids need help, and it's easy to provide. Parents, children, and families just need to start playing in the digital world together. And Andy Crouch, the author of The TechWise Family, it is absolutely completely possible to make different choices about technology from the default settings of the world around us. It is possible to love and use all kinds of technology, but still make radical choices to prevent technology from taking over our lives. And Leonard Sachs in The Collapse of Parenting. Turn off the device and take your child for a walk through the woods or on a hike up a mountain. Go on a camping trip. Late at night, when it's absolutely dark, take your child's hand and ask her to look up at the stars. Talk with her about the vastness of space and the tininess of our planet in the universe. That's reality. That's perspective. And finally, Delaney Brewston, doctor and documentary filmmaker of Screenagers. Can we really tell our kids do as we say, not as we do? And on that point, I will pass to Jenny to introduce our wonderful guests today.
Thank you, Penny. Now, this is a topic that first brought Penny and I together as friends and now colleagues. We were discussing how we navigate and support each other in this digitally connected world, and especially our children. But actually, this connected world often drives disconnection. So I can't wait to hear from our guests today. First up is Parven, who's the founder of Kids and Clicks and a leading expert in online safety and digital parenting. Parven helps parents, teachers, and safeguarding leads stay one step ahead in the digital world, providing practical, bite-sized guidance on social media, gaming, misinformation, and emerging technology. She's worked with organisations like AXA, NatWest, and Irwin Mitchell, led a funded research project with the University of Leeds focused on AI and digital inclusion, and was recently nominated the Everyday Leader Award at the Scottish Women in Cybersecurity Awards. Parven is also developing a unique online safety app designed to give parents and educators the tools they need to proactively protect and empower children online. Based in Edinburgh, she balances her professional work with family life, raising a toddler and an 8-year-old. And Chris is an employee brand consultant who, after a 20-year career in international HR consulting, decided to strike out on his own. He left his corporate role as head of EMEA consulting at one of the world's largest HR service firms on March 6, 2020, timing that coincided with the start of the global pandemic. The following period was challenging professionally, financially, and personally, but it also offered space for reflection and learning. In November 2020, Chris joined Randstad Rise Smart, a global career coaching organisation, as UK head of marketing, eventually moving into a global marketing leadership position in 2023. Alongside its corporate work, Chris developed a coaching framework for navigating midlife transitions, and in 2025 embraced a multi-hyphenate role, continuing his marketing work part-time, launching his coaching business Bright Path Partners, and co-hosting the Gen XZ Exchange podcast with his adult daughter, Lily. Chris lives in Stirlingshire, Scotland with his wife, where they're enjoying life as empty nesters while staying engaged with their professional and creative pursuits. And to bring a lovely nuance to today's podcast, we are also joined by Chris's daughter, Lily. She's a Glasgow-based writer and student finishing up a degree in social policy and English and creative writing after a pivot away from pharmacology that turned out to be one of her better choices. Since then, she's thrown herself into the charity sector, most recently acting as an events director for Glasgow's largest student fundraiser, and has developed a keen interest in how Gen Z are navigating tech, AI, and social media. After graduation, Lily's keeping her options open, exploring opportunities in technology and the third sector, planning to travel and figuring out the rest along the way. So let's get going with this very special panel, Penny.
Amazing. So I'm going to dive in with Parven first today. Thank you for joining us. I would love to ask you a question about how do you propose that parents have better conversations with their children about technology and digital behavior? And what do we as parents need to know more about?
First of all, thanks, thanks for having me here, and thanks, Jenny, for that kind introduction. The first thing I think is that as a parent, right, we need to recognize that we don't need to be tech experts, even though we're dealing with the digital world. I think the first thing is that we really need to be emotionally available. And, that is one of the most important thing here. And I also think that is super important because then you start building the kind of relationship and environment in your home that your child feels safe to talk to you about. And, when we talk about, how do we talk to our children about, what they're exposed to online, it should not be, one big talk that you sit down with your child across the table. It's all about connecting with your child. Maybe you're going for a walk, maybe you're going for a run, maybe you're cooking together, and make this as a daily conversation that you have with your child. You don't need to ask them, oh, what's happening in your online world? And trust me, I tried telling my child, like, oh, what did you see today online? And my child looked at me and said, like, are you okay, mommy? That's a weird question to ask. But when we're doing something together and then we're just going for a walk, she just, will come up and say that, oh, did you know my friend showed me something on Roblox or something like that? It comes out naturally. That's just because a child feels more relaxed. They feel a bit more connected with you. So it should not be that one big conversation you have with your child and then you feel like you've done that, tick in a box, and then they'll come and say to you, they'll come and talk to you. It's all about creating a very safe space, safe environment that your child feels like, relaxed enough to want to talk to you. And it's about being emotionally available. I think that's how the conversation should start. It's not about having, I'm going to talk to you today about AI chatbots and why you shouldn't be on it. No, but rather, have you heard about it? Do you know, I read this in the news. Do you think this is something your friends will use? If so, why do you think it's appealing? It's all about the open-ended questions without judgment. Let them do the talking. I think we really need to focus on the fact that, your phones and your internet, they are just tools, but there is a child behind those a screen that needs human connection. And, and it's all about the human side of technology that we shouldn't, forget about and just focus on the apps itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you suggest is the right place to begin for parents who are feeling sort of a bit lost about the tech world and feeling like they're not up to date? What would you suggest?
So I think the first thing you need to do, think about it this way, right? a lot of anxiety and worry comes when you do not have information. And what you need to do is closing in on that information gap. Think about it this way. If your child says that I'm going to go out and play, but does not tell you with whom, for how long, or where they're going, the first thing you're going to do is feel worried. Like, okay, where are you going? So sending your child, like, giving your child an iPad, or, if they're already connected to the internet, but you don't know where they're going or what they're doing or what they're interested in, that is when worry and anxiety comes in. So the best place to start is start understanding what it is they actually enjoy online. So, if you've got a child who already sort of, are browsing a little bit more independently, just start like, oh, what are you looking at? Or what are you watching? Or what's interesting? Why do you actually like this? Start getting in those little bits of information from your child so that you start understanding what it is that they're exploring. Because think about it that, this way that, your child and the internet is just like a play date. If you know where your child is going, you feel less worried and less anxious because you know what they could potentially be exposed to, and start having that conversation. If you know your child is going to Jack's house to play for the next 2 hours, when your child comes back, you can ask, your child, how was playing with Jack? Was it fun? Did you have lunch? What did you do? If your child is going to go and play Roblox, say for the next hour, you can ask, well, what games are you going to be playing on Roblox? And making sure that you've got all the settings in place so that, they don't chat to strangers, or whatever settings you and your child agree to. So it's all about knowing where they're going online, because it's literally, it's a place. The internet, the tools that we have, it's a place for a child, a place they learn, they grow, they explore, and you just need to be part of that place with them so that you don't have to feel so worried and anxious all the time when they have to go online.
I love that. So Parvin, something you said as well is maybe it's so child-led as well, because when you mentioned about AI chatbots and so it's not about sitting down and saying, let's talk about this, just using AI chatbots as an example, because actually you don't know if your child's even heard of them, is interested in them, what information they do have. And if you kind of go too big, you're almost introducing some of these ideas to them when they, how you so eloquently said, they might not even have an interest. And you're raising the interest in it because it's something that they might think you think's important, or you've put any value on. And I just really like that approach. It really resonated with me, because actually, what are they intrigued about, and what are they going to go and explore or want to know or have questions about that they'll look for answers, or you might need to answer. It's such a simple starting point. So thank you.
What I wanted to add on was, though, just some playing devil's advocate, is just the question that, you get these app requests from your children. So I have 3. So potentially that's 3 devices and 3 requests coming through. And, it's like, can I have this app? Can I do that app? And I do wonder as well if other parents feel the same sometimes, which is like overload, which is like, I'm not versed in all these apps. So when you get these requests coming in, it could potentially be, I know nothing about this app. I don't know what it's about. And I think sometimes a lot of that sort of exhaustion around the conversation, I think, and perhaps is why potentially in some families there isn't as much control or screen time or settings, is because it's exhausting. So what would you suggest in that sort of situation? Because it's in an idealistic world, yes, we could always be on with them with every single new content that they're looking at. But is it then the basis of trust then? Is that what you're sort of coming back to?
Yeah. Can you go back to your child and tell your child to tell you about the app, what's good and what they should be aware of? Mm-hmm. So send it back to them and tell them, okay, you want this app, but first of all, you need to tell me what is some things that I need to be, I need to know about this app. And I think it's about letting your child know, look, it's not that I don't trust you, but I don't trust things that are out there online, and my job is to protect you. So if you can tell me why you want this app, what is good about it, and what are some of the things you think might not be very good, then maybe we can negotiate and talk whether this app is right for you or whether it's not. So you gotta hand it back to your child to have that sense of responsibility as well. And you want to teach your child how to actually check for these things as well, giving them the skill to actually find out whether, is this app good or is this app bad? If it's bad, why is it bad? It's about teaching them, like, it's like road safety at the end of the day, right? If they just want to go and cross the road, you tell them, well, check left and check right and just make sure that you are safe before you cross the road. It's the same thing as well when you're introducing apps. teaching them how to check whether the app is right or wrong for them. Now, look, this is not going to be easy, because if a child wants Roblox because all their friends are on it, they're probably going to give all the justifications why they have to be on it. But the thing is this, right, Penny? We're living in an age where when you say that it can be a bit overwhelming, I completely understand that. And I empathize with a lot of parents who've got, a few children that they need to manage all these different apps and devices. But it's not impossible either. A few minutes, 10 minutes, it's all it takes, to check app reviews and settings. You can actually find out a lot about it already. It wasn't, back maybe 5 or 10 years ago where, you have to go through different websites and articles and stuff like that to find out about an app. You can do it pretty quickly now as well for your own knowledge as well. And unfortunately, we have to do that. If we want to protect our children online, we do need to take that step.
Mm. I think I was just going to say it also links into that sort of instant gratification as well, because you find an app that you think serves the need you have, be it entertainment or revision or information, and if you're a child and you've got the system in place of your parent, you send that request, you almost expect it just to sort of ping back with that approve or deny, and it's almost that. That's not the communication, and that's not the real engagement and connection that's needed. It's needed a little bit of space in between. But yeah, I think we're all just so used to being like, oh, I'm doing the right thing. I'm asking for permission, and there's some awareness to it, and there's some responsibility taken. Sorry, parent, but batting it to you. But you kind of expect it to come back as quickly. But it's about taking that moment or 10 realistically just to figure out what that response should be.
Yeah.
And Parven, do you think that we're raising digitally safe children or capable, like the work that you're doing? I mean, I'd be curious, and what are we looking at? Keeping them safe or making them more capable online, or a bit of both?
It has to be both. It cannot be just one or the other, because look, at the end of the day, right, we talk a lot about, say, for example, delaying access to social media and things like that. Your child is going to turn 16 at some point if we do end up delaying social media. What happens when they're 16? Do they understand addictive algorithms? Do they understand, manipulative content? Do they understand influencers who are taking advantage, say, of, their vulnerabilities and things like that? These are real life skills that our child needs to learn. So it's not just about, banning everything and that's it, your child's protected. No, at the end of the day, these are life skills that we actually need to teach them. This is like financial literacy. You don't want them to learn this in their 40s and then suddenly they've got, a big loan and a mortgage and a credit card debt. And then you wondered, like, what happened to my child? And, why are they going through this sort of, financial difficulties? But this is something that you want to equip them with that skills. And those skills can only come when you start the conversation with your child about these things in a very casual daily way. Now, this is going to feel very unnatural to a lot of us parents because we've never heard our parents talking to us about these things. And now suddenly we need to introduce these topics into our daily conversation. But the thing is, at the end of the day, right, we use this technology as well. We all have smartphones and we do understand its addictive features and things like that we use. It might be completely different from what your child is exposed to, but based on your own experience as an emotionally, grown up adult, you can start bringing in this conversation into it already. And it's all about being open to having that conversation without judging your child in terms of what it is they're actually interested in doing online.
Yeah, and I would love to add on to that, because you sort of mentioned, a lot of the work is around, supporting the parents. What are your thoughts on the latest verdict coming out of the US with Meta and Google? Because I was fascinated by that conversation, because it was, or the court case that played out. It was talking about how this young girl, and obviously they won the case, but this young girl, I think at the time had been 8 years of age, and she'd apparently been online for up to 16 hours a day. I'm curious to know whether you think, where does the responsibility lie? Because of course, these giant tech giants have a responsibility to play. And yet, do we need to be a bit more open and honest about the responsibility also being on our side as parents as well?
Yes, look, definitely. I think the problem is this, right, Penny? Right now, we have a lot more awareness than we did, say, about 10, 15 years ago. The Gen Zs who are now like in their 16 and 17, they have grown up with Snapchats and things like that, and that is because there was lack of awareness and there's lack of education in terms of how harmful these things can be. But fortunately now that there's a lot more awareness, so parents are sort of, wanting to take in control, wanting to, delay all of this because they're now understanding the impacts of this. So in this particular case, yes, when it did come out, you do question, well, where was the parent at the time? But also you need to understand maybe at the time, the parent itself probably don't understand the harm. All they know is that their child's just on a phone, watching some videos, watching some images. What harm can that actually do? So, but right now, in 2026, if you still allow your child to do that, then, there is parental sort of failure is what I would say, because we have a lot more awareness when it comes to these things.
Right. Thank you, Parven. Chris, I'd love to move on to you now. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.
Because we've got Lily on with us today, obviously we're going to orientate ourselves a little bit around, the relationship and how the digital world sort of played out for you guys. What do you think has been the biggest digital pressure for Lily growing up, or an experience that she had, or what she was dealing with? And how did that influence your decisions as a parent?
I think when we were parenting in the tween years, it started about 2013, 2014. My wife and I weren't social media users. We didn't use Facebook or Instagram, so really didn't have a great deal of knowledge about what we were opening up when we gave them a smartphone. I was strangely reassured by that stat you read out that 90% of parents have 11-year-olds have internet devices, because I think it was at 11 or 12 that Lily got her first smartphone. And we were fairly liberal in terms of our approach to parenting. And I think just thought it would be fun. It would be a cool thing for her to have access to that. Most of her friends seem to be getting phones about that time. And I think what I was most unaware of was the pressure she would come under in terms of comparisons, not just with her immediate peer group and the people she was at school with, but with everyone. And not just people her age, but as an 11, 12-year-old, as a young girl, being exposed to what I think were the beginnings of kind of influencer culture and very curated lifestyles, what perfect looked like, all of that kind of stuff. And then also starting to get into kind of the adolescent years and other pressures around all the challenges that teenagers face, what a healthy relationship looks like, what you need to be aware of in terms of alcohol and other substances. And we were pretty laissez-faire. And I don't think Lily can validate this. I don't think we ever had a conversation around what was your online world like today? What did you see? What did you experience? Was there anything that made you uncomfortable? Now, I would definitely be asking all of those questions you were talking about, Parven. But at the time, we just kind of left them to it, thinking if something bad happened, hopefully they would tell us. I wasn't aware of anything, but Lily can talk more about the pressure she maybe felt she was under and some of the things she was exposed to, which I was blissfully ignorant of, which I kind of regret now.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing. And like you're saying, we didn't have that knowledge. So it's a very different landscape. And also on top of that, I've just finished reading Girls by Freya India. I don't know if anyone's read it, but she's also Gen Z and writing about her experiences and how she grew up. And it's become a very, in the last sort of decade, I suppose, it's become a marketing tool. The children, the girls, the boys have become the products, and they were manipulated. And I don't know, Lily, like what your take on that was, but they were kind of the hamsters or the guinea pigs in that game.
Yeah, no, that's definitely how I feel. When me and my dad have spoken about it, especially in preparation for recording this today, that was one of the things I said. I got onto social media when I was about 11, which I don't see as a personal failing of my parents. I think at the time it was more of a systematic issue. Lack of education, lack of regulation on all fronts. But like Parven had said, and like you'd said, Dad, I think having the skills to talk about it would have been really helpful, because, we didn't have a sit down. We didn't even have the sit down across the kitchen table, like one big conversation. It was just kind of, get on with it. And I did feel like if anything significant happened, I could have come to you and Mum. But also, I don't know, I imagine it would have been a bit more difficult if you've not already set the precedent that this is something that you can talk about. This is a safe space. We're comfortable with each other talking about these kinds of things. So, yeah, definitely felt like we got chucked into it with very little guidance. But I'm glad now that this is a conversation. Conversations like this are happening. And we've seen the beginnings of policy response as well, which is really encouraging. But for me and my generation, I do feel quite sad that we just got chucked into the deep end and left to it. But I'm glad that we're doing something about it now, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know anything about privacy settings,
No.
security, and I don't think that was really that sophisticated amongst the apps at the time. And obviously, like, we would ask you about how your day was and how school was, but I don't think we ever had a conversation about how was your online activity.
Yeah,
I think
I was just going to ask Chris whether there was a moment when you noticed Lily sort of shifting from play-based entertainment to being on her device more and using that more for play, I guess, in quotations. Was there a time when you sort of thought, oh, this is changing?
I can't think of a particular moment. I think it was in use fairly frequently. It was the main mode of communication, I think, between you, Lily, and your friends. I think there was one incident that did come to mind in terms of, oh, this is interesting in terms of what's happening. And it was a game called Moshi Monsters that was like an online version of things you could kind of buy in the shops. There was a free service and a paid service, and we decided not to sign up for the paid service, which Lily was very upset about at the time, as I remember. And we did sort of stumble across an incident where she had made friends with someone in Moshi Monsters who was a paid subscriber. And Lily asked her to do whatever you could do in the paid area, get jewels or something else. Could she get some things for Lily and bring them back out?
I don't think it was so much of an ask, but more of a demand, which was the issue.
And bring them back out so she'd get these extra jewels or coins or whatever it was. And that was like, oh, okay. This could be a bit dangerous, actually, if you're interacting with people, asking them to do things or they're asking you to do things. That was a big wake up.
Yeah, there was a bit of a blurring of boundaries between things that I don't think as a child I would have gone up to someone in the shop, for example, and started demanding, like, oh, I don't have money for a packet of wine gums, you need to buy me my wine gums. But obviously at that age online, when you have a screen in between you and this other person, and it's not even a person you're seeing on the screen, it's literally a monster avatar, it makes it very difficult for your little child brain to compute that what you're doing is wrong. And so you can see how that could progress into problematic behaviours on social media later, if it's cyberbullying or just the way you're speaking to your peers. So yeah, that was an interesting point. I remember for me, I guess if I was to trace back to when I realised things had shifted from play to being online, I remember I used to go to friends' houses after school. One of my friends was really upset because I wouldn't play with her. I wanted to sit on my iPad and play on my apps. So that must have been about 10 or something. Can't remember when I had my iPad. Don't know if you're any better remembering, Dad, but that was probably when I started to get absorbed into the online world.
Lily, sorry.
Parven.
Lily, I just wanted to ask, right? So you mentioned earlier something interesting that, right, okay, maybe you wish that, those conversation, has happened at home and, your dad giving you a bit more awareness and stuff. But I do wonder, right, if at the time, if your dad, Chris, actually came up to you and said, well, Lily, you really shouldn't be talking to strangers because it's not safe and all. Would you have actually listened to the advice? Would you have actually stopped doing, what you were doing or
This is why I think what you were saying about introducing it, having multiple conversations, building up that connection and building up the trust would be important, because if we had gone from having zero conversations about online safety, and my only understanding of online safety being what you get shown in school, which is the very black and white, typical, don't talk to strangers online. You get shown a video about grooming and that's kind of where it's left off. So that was my whole education up until that point. And then if I'd went from having no conversations with my parents to all of a sudden feeling almost like called out or scolded, I think it would have almost pushed me further into the internet, because I would have been like, you're being patronizing, you don't know what you're talking about, I can keep myself safe. Whereas I think if over a period of time you build up that trust and you prove to each other that it's a safe space for both of you to have conversations. If I did come forward and say I did something or said something online that I'm not proud of, or I've seen something that's scared me, and I wasn't met with retaliation, I wasn't met with being scolded or punished, I think that would build up that relationship, and I'd feel more comfortable to take on advice at that point.
I think because it was new, I don't think our approach would have been to scold or reprimand you. It would have been like to learn more, to discover more. I saw a really interesting example of something on the news last week. It was the mother of an 8-year-old who was using an app online, and she was trying to explain to her daughter that the people she was connecting with in this app might not be who they say they are.
Yeah.
And her daughter couldn't quite get her head around this. So a little while later, the mother used another device to go onto the app to create a profile as an 8-year-old that she called Sophie. She found her daughter, connected with her in the game. They had a conversation and chatted. Her daughter was having a great time. And 10 minutes later, she revealed Sophie was her mum on her other device in another room. And the daughter was quite upset by that, but it really brought it to life in terms of, oh, you just seemed like another 8-year-old that I was interacting with. Actually, you're a grown adult, you're my mum. And that really helped to bring it to life. And I thought that was a really interesting idea to help younger children understand exactly what can happen and how misleading people can be if there is a sinister element to it, or just to make the point that not everyone is who they say they are.
And also, Chris, I think it's really important. It's like that real experience that the parent and the child could experience together.
Yeah.
So it feels so obvious. And Parven, you opened with it, and Chris, you sort of confirmed it again. It's that the generations that are the parents now didn't have these experience with these apps and these accessibility. So how do you almost know what conversations to start in everyday life, because you don't know what they are? And Penny said it a few times. It's around gaming. It's like if you don't want your children, or you think it's annoying, for want of a better word, that your kids are playing so much of this game, go and find out what it is about it and why they love it, and actually experience it. And that example you just gave, for the mother to go on, see how easy it is to set up, see how easy it is to find her daughter, and then also to be able to prove that point to her daughter. How valuable is that? And again, it goes back to that, taking the 10 minutes of time to really sort of explore. From my experience, from my young children, there's a gaming desire of my 7-year-old. He just wants to game and get a games console, and I'm very hardline no, just because I don't want gaming in my house, because I just think I'll lose my male contingent to it. I just don't. I know I'm being a bit hardline, so I do allow it, and it's the adverts on the games for me, that having looked over his shoulder or sat next to him and watched him play these games, I know that the games that we've let him play are safe and and simple enough, and but it's the adverts, and that's a whole new world, because then he's getting already sucked into this commercialization of stuff, and the strange ways of hooking people in. There's this weird advert where you have to stop, or game you have to play to, I don't know, and it's this woman's cold and her baby, and it's quite dark, and you're like, this has come from a gem game, and it all changes. So unless I wasn't, it's his experience of what he's experiencing, even if you think it's safe or it, it's to really get in there with them and just see it. And if that going into the social media world is getting on social media yourself and looking at the settings, like you said, Chris, and figuring out actually what it can do and how you set it up. It's still a minefield, but if you do take the time, then maybe you can learn quite a lot.
Yeah. I also think, Jenny, I'll give you an easy example when it comes to gaming. My daughter really wanted Roblox because all her friends were on it, and she kept banging on about it. And, I wasn't comfortable. But, one day I gave in and just said, right, okay, we'll do it, but we'll do it together. Okay. And we did it together. And you know what, Jenny, sometimes if you're lucky enough, it just kind of like, satisfies that curiosity and then they forget about it. And that is what happened with my older one. Just the curiosity satisfied, and then she never asked for it again. And that was it. Because what I started noticing was that because I wasn't allowing it at home, she would go to someone else's house and play it there. And then she'd be too scared to come home and tell me about it unless, the mom of that friend, she told me and said, oh, just to let you know that, your daughter, they played a bit of this game. And when I asked, I said, did you actually play the game? She said, yeah, but I was a bit scared to tell you. I said, no, don't be scared. Come on, let's just do it together at home. So you can tell me when you do it. And if you've seen something that you feel is upsetting, just let me know. It's completely fine. So sometimes it's also taking a step back and trusting your child, even though they're young, to enable this conversation for them to sort of feel that, right, if I make a mistake, it's fine. It's okay. Nothing's going to happen to me. And allowing that feeling to come into your child as well.
And I think if you don't take that approach, Parven, you drive behaviors underground. We had good friends round the corner from where Lily and her younger brother grew up, who had two boys who were a little older than our two. And I think when their eldest was maybe 14, there was just a total ban on Call of Duty. The parents had decided that's not appropriate for our son. And he was playing it at friends' houses. He found a way of being able to play it, even though it wasn't allowed at home. Far better maybe to have the conversation about what is it about the game that maybe you don't like, what alternatives might there be, but to kind of bring it more out in the open than just ban it, because 14-year-olds are going to find a way, especially with their kind of digital literacy, they're going to find a way of doing what they might want to do without the parents finding out.
I'm curious what you think about social media bans then, Chris.
Actually, right now, I am in support of it. I hope we do take that step, knowing what we know now about the harms that clearly the platforms can do. I think it's a really blunt instrument, but we've got to start somewhere. I was really encouraged to see what's happening in Australia. Lily, I think your view is that given your experience, you probably don't think you should have had social media, in those early years.
I think not only the ban, like we've spoken about, banning something outright is one thing, but teenagers especially will find a way around and be exposed to things regardless. I think equipping our children and young people with the skills to recognise when something they're seeing online is harmful, and knowing not to engage with it, knowing how to look at something, critically evaluate if it's worthwhile, if it's good for society, if it's good for their views about other people. Because banning it's one thing, but actually, like we spoke about before, what happens when you turn 16 and then you do download social media, you're going into blind otherwise. So I think just keeping the conversation open as well about why it is that it's not good for young people's brains, the types of things that they can be exposed to. So yeah, not just the outright ban. I would like it to be supplemented with a much more thorough and comprehensive education in schools and at home. But yeah, in favour.
Because it can also move across then to gaming, right? There are other places where these conversations and this content can then still be shared. So it really is about equipping every generation with the tools to understand what's going on. And I do feel like that's the holistic conversation that parents absolutely also need support to understand the world, because it is, all of us, it's moving so quickly that we all need to kind of stay on the pulse. Lily, very quickly, what about social media from your own experience? Like, were there any good things that came out of it, and what were the bad things? Like, if you had to sort of summarize.
There was definitely good things about social media. Like for me, I was on Instagram and Tumblr from a very young age, and that exposed me to lots of music that I like now, lots of art, fashion. I feel like I did pull a large part of my identity growing up from things that I found online. And it was really great for my creativity, discovering new things that older, cooler people were doing, of course, and then also being able to stay in touch with my friends that went to different schools, see what people were up to. It definitely, social media has its perks, that's why so many of us are on it. But the downsides, when we talked about the social comparisons earlier on, when I was first coming on social media, it was fortunate, I guess, that the kind of airbrushing, face tuning technology that basically everyone has access to now was only really being used by the beginnings of the influencers. And back then it was more like YouTubers and stuff. So you weren't having to compare yourself to your peers. It was just like the group of influencers and famous people. But now I really, really feel for young people and teenagers coming onto social media, because it's like everyone has this technology. Everyone is making their lives and themselves physically look better than they are. So the social comparison side of things is really difficult. There's the obvious ones as well, the exposure to grooming. And now what we're seeing with the looks maxing culture, black pill culture with young men is also a form of grooming, the sexualization of young girls and how they internalize certain beliefs about themselves and how they're supposed to look. Like my dad was talking about, I think for me growing up, when I remember that it was like a flip was being switched in school, because it went from being friends with everyone, boys and girls, to all of a sudden the boys had discovered Instagram models and fitness models, older, plastic surgeries, etc., and were then comparing their female peers to these women they were seeing online. And then as a young girl, you internalize that. So yeah, I do think the negatives outweigh the positives for the most part. And yeah, it just goes to show how important it is that we have these types of conversations and that there is some policy development.
And how is your relationship with it today, with social media? Do you think you've changed your,
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the things I did quite recently was I did a bit of like a scrubbing of my account, like went through, privated my account, removed people that I had following or following me that I didn't know. So went through and reduced the people that I was following and people that were following me. I also, for years now, haven't followed anyone who I would compare myself to. I think the concept of influencing in general is pretty toxic, and if you're one of these people who follows hundreds of influencers who are traveling and they have expensive clothes and makeup and they're getting procedures done and they look amazing all the time, I think if you're waking up, going on your phone in the morning, going on your phone in your lunch break, going on your phone before bed, scrolling and being exposed to countless people whose lives are seemingly so much better than yours, that's really unhealthy. And I noticed a big change, a big improvement in my mental health when I just stopped engaging with that kind of content. And then in terms of posting, I thought it was good that Instagram introduced the hiding like count feature. You can turn off comments as well, because sometimes I think it's even draining having those numbers exposed there or feeling like you have to reply to people. I definitely would say that I post a lot less just because I don't feel as compelled to do it now to try and get validation. That was a big thing for me growing up. If I was posting a picture, I was sat there for hours afterwards refreshing and monitoring how many likes and comments that I would get. So definitely stepped away from that. I think you need to kind of put things in place to prevent yourself from spiraling. So for me, the privating of the accounts, removing people I don't know, unfollowing people who don't make me feel good about myself. If I'm seeing your profile come up and feeling miserable, why am I following you? So all these kinds of harm reduction, self-care measures almost, because I don't want to come off of social media entirely, but I don't want it to be like a horrible, miserable experience every time I log on. So finding that balance is really helpful.
It's very subliminal as well, because you think you might be following someone who's inspirational or aspirational, but actually then it's like that comparison that comes in. And I followed a lot of parenting accounts when I had the boys were young, and it was useful because I was still quite curated with it, so I made sure that it was the people that gave the right type of advice. But I'm still following them now, and I'm like, why? And then I start judging how I haven't done things, but I'm like, but I'm done with that now. I can't go back and do anything just because that's their advice now. So you've got to keep quite on top of it. And
social media has become so big that there's really an influencer for everything now. I think initially it was like, I'm a travel influencer, I'm a beauty influencer. But now, like you say, you've got parents on there, you've got people who are influencing about really niche interests. So whatever kind of corner of the internet you're living in, there's going to be someone online that you think initially is maybe aspirational, inspirational, but actually it just starts this feedback loop of, oh, they're doing something better than me, I need to up my game, feeling worse about yourself. So it's really tricky, and that's why I would generally just recommend to cut it out or follow people who are maybe a little bit more unfiltered and quote unquote normal, hopefully.
And Parven, I'd love to ask you, do you think it's also the responsibility of the parents to impart, to share with their children what they're doing on their screens? Because I'm just mindful that, like, work, for instance, as an adult, you unfortunately, even if you don't really want screen time, it's happening, right? Because that's how we're networking, that's how we're having this conversation today. Is it important that we're also opening up and they're knowing what we're doing when we're on our devices?
Yeah, no, definitely, Penny. Look, I'll give you my own example. A lot of, well, everything I do is basically online, right? So, if you ask my children, they'll be like, you're always online, you're always on a device, you're always on your screen, but you switch off our TV or iPad and so on, right? But here's the thing, right? They do understand there is a difference between entertainment and just scrolling versus like mommy's actually doing work. And that's the thing that I keep telling them that, when I'm on my phone, I'm either booking a holiday club, replying to your teacher's email, preparing for my own work meetings. This is work. The screen that you see is not all the same. Some can be entertainment and some can be work. But the one thing that, that I am also still learning in my journey is that I've stopped telling them that, just 2 more minutes and mommy will be with you. The problem is that when I start giving time frames like 2 more minutes, but then I don't stick to that time frame, which I never do, then I am basically setting myself up for failure in terms of expectations with screen time. So what I do is that now I be a bit more specific in terms, I need to write this email. Once I'm done, I'll come to you. So you need to give me time. So I keep emphasizing the points that not all screen time is the same. And I think we need to normalize that because, if you just tell your child that, just give me 2 minutes and I just need to do this, they don't understand what it is that you're doing. But when you start putting words into it or labels like I'm doing work right now, I'm replying to an email, I've got a presentation I need to prepare, they do understand that I'm not just sitting there and having a bit of fun. So, it's using those words and letting them know that, what you're doing is actually work. But there are times where I'm sitting down and, I just want to scroll. I just want to have a bit of a brain drain, say, afternoon, kind of a thing. And I'll tell them and I'll show them, that this is what I'm watching, whether it's a funny video on YouTube or something like that. And they're like, oh, what are you watching? I'm like, oh, it's something funny. And, normalizing that as well, that, that is not something abnormal. That is something that we all do as well. And that is okay. But just having the time to do it and, when you do it and how long you're on it for as well.
Yeah, and equally, it's not going away at any time soon. Like when the world, as much as we want to, it's not going away. And it is how we manage our lives in so many ways with our phones, with our devices, whether it's like you said, booking tickets or the school contacts you, or they've got the progress of your child on the app on it, or work or whatever else. And I think it's also so important that we're all vulnerable and actually say it's affecting every single one of us, right? And so let's just not be guilty about it. That doesn't really serve us in a way. How can we be open and honest and actually think about how we can at least be more intentional with the time that we do have that isn't necessarily on the devices and how we can reduce it, I suppose.
Allied to that, we've come to a point where I hear stories about young adults who are discovering that their parents posted everything about their lives online without their consent, and they're making their parents question what was going on there. Everything about me is there's this massive digital footprint which I didn't have any involvement in, and that might come back to bite them or the parents in some way.
Yeah, Chris, just to, point further, I started this work in 2018, so more than 5 years ago. And at the time, if there was an influencer who posted everything about their child, a mom influencer, and I actually sent her a private message on Instagram at the time, I like what she does, I do follow her. And, I said some of your pictures of your children are quite intimate. They really shouldn't be online. Your children might not like this when they grow up. So she blocked me. Okay, naturally, this was 2018. No one talks about online safety at the time. We have a lot of of awareness now, but not, then. And you know what? Recently, I had another Instagram account. I did check out on her again because I did like her, and she's completely removed all her children's photos. So there's none of that. And she, basically deleted that account and had a completely new account. So something must have happened there. And that's the thing, right? Children's footprint and, children's images being posted online without consent. We tell children not to post photos of themselves online, but when we are doing it for them, what does that tell you about us? And I put the same argument to schools as well. When you tell, your school, not, you tell, the students in your school, don't post, photos of yourself online, but the school's doing it for you on their Instagram page, on their Facebook page as part of promotion. So what does that, what does that tell you about the school sort of, setting the example itself before, even telling their children? So there's lots of things to think about here.
Jenny, what did you want to add on to that?
So I was going to say, I'm definitely not Chris lumping you in this, but as the parent of Gen Z, so with that sort of older perspective, I'm finding as well that there's, we've got a lot of focus on young people and as parents, but there's also other generations that are still navigating this, and the kind of people who are lonely that put in a lot of time on their devices. And as we were talking, it was about the awareness of what we're doing. I had my son home sick yesterday and my dad was visiting, so we had a pretty chilled day. It was really nice, but I was trying to get a bit of work done. So I'd be picking up my phone, the WhatsApp would be going, the emails would be coming in, and I wasn't letting my son watch much TV or play many games because he was sick. I wasn't sure how unwell he was, but I was being quite firm. But we were listening to an audio book on his little Yoto player, and he basically did not want each chapter to start again because my dad was constantly on his phone, but he was then also on his iPad. But to my 7-year-old son, he thought that was the end. He was reading. He has his Kindle on his iPad, so he was reading a book. But we're also multitasking as well. We're doing everything now, and I think that's a lot for children to comprehend as well. We know that we can sit there, be pretty present with them. I'm not going to say wholly, and still do a bit of admin on our phone or read a message. And I see that in my father. He's a lot older than us, and his so much is on that device. And as a grandparent and grandparenting, even they're noticing like how much he's got a device or using it because it's got so much meaning for him, and he it's kind of got that lonely element as well. But I just thought that was the comparison and experience I wanted to bring in.
It's striking that balance, isn't it? It's a great form of connection. It's incredibly convenient. All the books you can take on holiday on a Kindle, the access you've got to entertainment. But I think people of any age can get sucked in. We've all been down a rabbit hole on social media and endlessly scrolling on one app or another. We all need to remain focused on striking the right balance.
I think older people are kind of, for a large part of it, quite excluded from the conversation as well. But I've seen stuff like that as well. And I know friends whose grandparents, some of my friends have even said that, oh, my grandpa's addicted to his iPad. And I think they are left out of the conversation quite a bit because it's almost assumed, oh, they don't know how to work these things. Like, how could you ever get sucked into your phone if you can't work a smartphone? So there's an element of ageism in there, but also it's like, that is an interesting point to bring up, because how do we include all generations in this conversation? Because it does affect older groups as well.
And Lee,
I was going to say, just with AI and all the kind of phishing and all kinds of things that are now coming into play, are we equipped every generation with the skills to be able to decipher what is right and wrong, or what is fraud or not? And I think that's another layer. Yeah, it's no longer just the salesman coming in your front door and getting you to sign for new windows or something. It's happening online. So.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to add that I said about multitasking, but with all due respect, not just my dad, but he actually isn't able to, and he will ignore the boys if he's just on his phone and he's not doing anything respectfully, if you listen to this, Dad, sorry, anything that valuable where he, but he just is, because it's consuming to that point. And yeah, the whole host of things that he can be subjected to as well is, keeping him on his toes, or making sure he shares with me as well, what's going on.
I know, I'm really grateful that my grandma's not on any kind of social media, because when we talk about AI and some of the stuff that's on there, I mean, it's getting to the point now where sometimes I struggle to tell if something is real or not, and that'll only get more intense. AI is only going to only become more realistic. So it makes me grateful that my grandma's not on any kind of social media and not going to fall susceptible to any of those scams, but it's only a matter of time before things are getting emailed out and all the rest. So yeah, super concerning.
We've got a family group chat, and half of the things my father forward in the group chat is all fake AI generated videos, and it's like constantly having to tell him like, oh, fake news, that's AI generated. It's like, oh, really? But he's getting smarter though. He's like, he's catching it better now, but it makes it harder. It makes it a lot harder.
But it actually makes the point, Parven, because he's sharing it with you. So at least he's having that communication about it, and someone's able to validate it. And now he's been able to add to his learning and his information and his knowledge, and, start to vet it.
Yeah, we're all learning together. We are breaking new ground in terms of AI and positives and negatives, and all having to figure it out as we go. So better that we do it all together across the generations than kind of isolate ourselves.
Lily, I'd love to flip it and ask you, is there anything that you sympathize with parents about with having to deal with the digital online world?
I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for parents trying to navigate online safety now. I dread to think, in my generation are all parents, I dread to think what obstacles we'll be facing on the internet. I don't know, I think just the lack of any kind of research or conversation about things until fairly recently. I do really feel bad for parents, and I also feel bad for parents and older generations with their relationship with social media as well. Like, sorry to my mum if she's listening, but like my mum can be really bad for getting sucked into her messages and being on her phone and
at the dinner table.
And it's difficult when we talk about setting an example. Mum can be quite like, I'll get a bit of a row for sitting on my phone when we're having a conversation, and mum will do the exact same thing. So when we've spoken about it's something that we're all trying to navigate together, it certainly is. And I think everyone keeping each other in check, and having family group chats where you can send things in and say, is this real? And using the same framework that we use for kids with maybe older family members. Like if I was going to ask Grandma, have you seen anything on the internet today you want to talk about? Should be capable of learning and picking things up. And then with you guys, if I don't know, Dad, you're pretty good on your computer, but if anything came up, having it be like a two-way conversation rather than just there's one person who's subject to all this confusion, not knowing what's going on, because actually we all have different corners of the internet that we occupy, and we all have different parts of the internet that we don't have a Scooby about. So yeah, in short, I do really feel for parents. I think it's really, really difficult, and I think a combination of conversations at home, school and policy, it needs to be tackled from a few different directions.
Do you think we can ever, as parents, so my generation, I suppose, ever understand really what growing up in the digital world for your generation really meant for your identity? Do you think we'll ever get it exactly?
I think that's a really good question, and I would say unfortunately the answer is no. I think if you weren't on the internet at that time in the circles that my generation was on, I don't think so. And it's really difficult to describe because it was literally booming. Like this, as we've said, this was the beginnings of YouTubers and influencers, and then also the fact that all of these different social media platforms were taken off at once. And it was the first time, like even if you think about music, for example, it's the first time we're seeing bands be able to market themselves in this way. People could build brands from at home on their phone and then be performing at, like, if we look at Justin Bieber, who was just performing at Coachella, and he started off with YouTube covers. It was crazy. It was all going on, and I think unless you were in it, or at least pretty close to it, it's a really difficult thing to describe to other generations. But now that more people are online, I think that gives you, it's a little bit more relative now that more people are on social media and that there is more information coming out about how these things work. It's not as like out of reach as before. But yeah, ultimately, I unfortunately think it's something that's kind of only going to be understood between Gen Z and maybe millennials as well, because they were also in those spaces. So no, I don't think we'd be able to understand each other fully, but we can get pretty close.
But Penny, I think you could say that about every generation.
Yeah.
You know, my parents grew up in wartime. My dad was evacuated. I have no idea what that would have been like. For me, I guess it was the beginning of the rave scene and going clubbing. And I think it's just as well that my mother doesn't have a clue what was going on when I was going out during those times. And I think there always needs to be a sort of healthy differential between each generation. I think the challenge now is the pace of change is so crazy and is only going to get faster. None of us are fully keeping on top of it. And the challenges for the next generation, with the implications of where we see technology going, I think are going to be perhaps greater than anyone's faced before. That's a biggie.
You're right, but I would say we didn't have to go to your mum didn't have to go to the clubs at any point in time. She didn't have to follow that. And to a point, we've got to accept the fact that somehow we've got to be in this world to a point, right? So it's kind of getting that balance right. Absolutely. I'd love to turn to the tween question now, and that is, why do parents think rules are the same for every kid? And don't we all use the internet differently? Don't know who'd like to start. Chris, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think for us as parents, it was important that we were consistent with Lily and her younger brother. There's 3 years between them, so that they had the same rules by and large, although in terms of technology, things changed in the space of, when Charlie became 14 compared to when Lily was 14. So I think there needs to be consistency. So it is kind of treating them the same to some extent, but recognizing that they are individuals, they have different interests. We didn't force them to do the same things. They moved in different social circles. I think more broadly, it is far too easy to think you can apply a broad brush to this. We've talked about the pros and cons of social media, and for some children and young people, it is absolutely invaluable in terms of the connection, feeling seen, finding support for some of the things that they're dealing with. And that needs a different approach to maybe, the outright ban and no, excuse me, no one can have this. And that's a really difficult line to tread. But from a parenting perspective, I think there does need to be some consistency with the children in your household, just to be fair.
Thank you. Absolutely. Lily?
I think there's an assumption from parents that their children can't be the kids on the internet engaging with the bad stuff, the negative stuff. If we take the looks maxing, black pill, we could even extend it a bit into the incel culture that we're seeing online at the moment. I think parents would all assume that their sons would never be the type to be engaging in those types of things. And I think parents have a responsibility to recognise signs and pay attention to what their kids are engaging with, and not just assume my child's an angel, my child would never be, having these conversations online. I think there's a blanket, like what you were talking about, Dad, about just applying the same rules to everyone. I don't think it works. If we look at how, again, the looks maxing thing, it's mostly like 14, 13-year-old boys engaging in that kind of content. And I don't think anyone would like to think of their 13 or 14-year-old doing so, but that is the reality. There's something like, I think he's got like 500,000 people just on one Telegram group. So yeah, I think recognizing that we do all use the internet differently, and that your child might have fallen susceptible to essentially grooming online and older people taking advantage of their insecurities, that could be a reality. So I think facing up to that is really important. Yeah.
That's a good point. Thank you. And Parvin?
Well, I think parents think the rules are the same for every kid because then it feels fair. If child number one is getting 30 minutes of screen time, child number two gets 30 minutes of screen time, and then that's it. Everybody switches off. But I think it's also understanding that not all screen time is the same, like what Lily is saying. A child 30 minutes, on YouTube, learning how to draw, have pens and paper while drawing, watching something on YouTube is very different from a child, say, 30 minutes just scrolling on TikTok. And I think that is where a rule shouldn't be the same. 30 minutes reading an online book or whatever it is a child is doing is very different than passive consumption. And I think that's the thing that a lot of parents tend to sort of ignore is the content, sort of just looking at the time and not looking at what your child's actually doing with that, with their screens. Because again, not all screens are created equal, but the part that everybody gets 30 minutes just feels fair and just kind of eliminates any sort of further arguments at home. That's the part. As parents, we're juggling so many different things, and all we want to do is just make life a little bit easier when everyone gets the same rule. But we can't treat screen time that way because every child engages with their devices quite differently. Again, focusing on content is just so important in terms of what your child is doing with their device.
Yeah. And again, like, we're putting rules into place as a parent, that's because we do care. So even if we get it wrong, it's coming from a good place, right?
Yeah.
But then having those conversations and maybe just, it goes back to what you were saying, Parvin, about how you sit down together and talk about what we're doing, and then having that awareness and then making the right choices together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think also, Penny, is allowing your child to make mistakes. You've got to understand this is like learning how to ride a bicycle. They will fall down, they will click on the wrong thing, they might end up talking to a stranger knowing that they shouldn't have. But the point is, you let them get back up again. You don't take the bicycle away from them and tell them you're never riding a bicycle because you had one fall. It's also recognizing the part that they will make mistakes, and it's okay that they make mistakes, and coming with it without that whole, judgmental place, like, oh, I told you so many times that you shouldn't be doing or clicking. Why are you still doing it? That kind of that builds a very sort of, repulsive behavior, and that is what you don't want. So allowing a safe space to make mistakes is also another very important thing.
Yeah.
And so that they come to you as well and tell you when it does happen, rather than keeping it hidden, maybe not knowing what to do with what they found.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I think building trust, particularly in those tween years, you do have to loosen the reins a little. You need to give them a bit of autonomy, trust that they'll make the right decisions, but you're still there to talk through things if anything untoward does happen.
Yeah. I think shaming in those tween, really important formative years, any response, like for me, speaking from experience, if we had those conversations, Dad, and you turned round, or if I'd came to you with an issue and you turned round and made me feel shamed or embarrassed, I think that would just make me want to crawl up into a ball and die and never come
Shut
to
it
you
down.
ever again.
Yeah.
So it's when we bring it back to the whole building trust and creating a safe space for these conversations, that's like the prime time to do it, when your child makes a mistake fully.
We had a guest on our podcast a while ago who specialized in addiction prevention. And one of the things she was talking about was having a no questions asked policy. So the example she gave was, if your teenagers are at parties, there's a code word they can send in a text message if they want to be collected because they feel really uncomfortable. And the role of the parent is to kind of go and get them. But there's just an understanding that there are no questions asked on the night. So whatever's happened, you get home, calm down, everyone is maybe in a better place the next day, you can have a conversation. But I know as a parent, when she talked that through, I was thinking, I can imagine how difficult that would have been when I had picked up Lily or Charlie, to not want to ask them questions, shout at them, shut it down. It takes a lot for the parent to maintain that balance, but I think it's really important in terms of building trust that
we all need a safe harbor, don't we? Absolutely. Yeah. You know that you're not going to be judged in that moment. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much to our guests, Parven, Chris and Lily, for sharing their insights today. Today's conversation reminds us that parenting in a digital age isn't about having all the answers or perfectly managing every minute of screen time. It's about narrowing that gap between concern and understanding. It's about the courage to be digitally curious alongside our children. The most powerful tool in our kit isn't an app or a filter, it's the conversations that we have around this. Thank you to our listeners. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might appreciate it and leave us a review. We're Penny and Jenny, and this has been Perspectives from the Informed Perspective. Keep noticing, keep reflecting, and until the next time, keep informing those perspectives.